Welcome to How Did We Get Here, the podcast where each week our two talking heads, being myself, Jess Bost,
and Mark Newfield,
bring on guests to learn more about their past 5 jobs before landing where they are today.
Because, as you know, life is super simple, straightforward, and never makes people ask, wait, you did what?
Join us for an honest convo on career exploration, overcoming setbacks, considering when to pivot, and offering encouragement on how to find value in your career and life choices.
And with that, let's ask the question.
Holy crap, how did I get here? Together. And we're back. Today's financial planning topic is sabbaticals.
So we're talking about what happens when you come to an inflection point in your career where you say, I need to take a step back and evaluate what's next for me.
Yeah. So to kick off the conversation, we're going to talk to one of our favorite people on the inside, someone who's currently experiencing their own sabbatical.
And it's pretty interesting, actually. Something you might know about Dave Nadig. He's a prominent figure in the financial industry, particular if you do any research around exchange-traded funds and you kind of go deep into investment research. I mean, you're going to have seen his name.
Something you might not know about Dave Nadig, he actually moved to Hollywood earlier in his career and life to become a screenwriter, slept on the floor of his sister's apartment.
So when I graduated from UMass, then I went to Hollywood where I was going to go write the Great American Screenplay. I was a creative writing major in undergraduate. But I went to Hollywood and slept on my sister's floor, who was doing something there.
And that, let's call it, tumbleweeded him into more and more opportunities to both grow himself and his interests.
She was already in Hollywood. She's 4 years older than me. And she managed to, friend of a friend hook me up on day crews, just working on sets because I'm growing up on a farm. You learn how to swing a hammer reasonably well. And so I worked on a lot of B-movie sets in 87, 88, which was a lot of fun, a lot of late nights working on horror films. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing there either. But, the great thing about Hollywood is much like the ETF industry, everybody was making it up as they went along.
Yeah.
There's no playbook on how you make a $10,000 B-movie slasher at 3 o'clock in the morning in Alameda without a permit. So you figure it out, So that was sort of my second real job in Hollywood. And eventually the people just found out that I was reasonably competent and techie. And so I ended up getting pulled into a live daily TV show called Home, which was a 90 minutes every day, 5 days a week home improvement show on ABC. And so every morning at 5 a.m., getting on set, working with actors and building stuff. And eventually they moved me over to doing payroll. And then I fell in love with numbers. And so that was my big shift towards finance. Was at the age of 20, they put me in charge of payroll for a 100-person production company. I think I'd ever been handed in a way that I really identified as responsibility. I mean, on a farm, I suppose people always would say, I got my driver's license when I was 13 because I had to drive tractors, and you could get a farm license to drive the tractors on the road.
Cool.
And people are always like, oh, you have to learn so much responsibility on a farm. But I never really thought of it that way because it was just how I grew up.
So how did he get here?
The honest truth is, if I look back over my entire career, I think the longest job I ever actually held was director of research for ETF.com, which I think was my title from 2008 to 2016 or something like that. And that may be the longest I've ever held down a single title. I've been bought and sold and, gotten rolled up in things before. But I want that feeling of not knowing. The feeling of not knowing is what's really interesting. And that's actually what drove me to sort of leave the dream of becoming a Hollywood writer. I mean, A, I wasn't good, but B, also, I didn't understand money at all. And I grew up quite poor. So I never have examples around how money worked. But when handed this payroll, which I remember at one point, was $100,000, which seemed like an infinite amount of money in 1987. Yeah. And it was my responsibility to make sure all those checks got paid. And I was like, I don't have any idea how any of this works. None. And I'm the one running the payroll system. And so I just got more and more into being an autistic, I went down the rabbit hole on that and I came out 3 years later with an MBA because I just had to learn how all the money stuff worked. So after a year of doing that, I realized I just wanted to know more and started applying to B school.
And actually, where is here?
a great time to learn those lessons. I think like in your late 20s to me is when you start, well, for me, I started becoming a fully formed human being. Like I sort of refer to it as like Dave 2.0. Met my wife in my mid 20s, figured out what I wanted to really do. At that time, I was the managing director of corporate strategy for what was then called Wells Fargo Nico Investment Advisors, proto ETF days, and came out of business school and wanted to do that kind of work. So I was consulting. I built a consulting firm called Cerulli Associates with Kurt Cerulli. And then Wells Fargo was our biggest client and they got tired of paying our bills. So they hired me out from underneath the practice. And then that's when I jumped into the ETF stuff. But that window of time, that sort of late 20s to early 30s, I feel is just really critical for me, it was just super critical in establishing the kind of adult I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd done it 10 years earlier. I guess I meet a lot of young people who in their early 20s seem very focused and ready to go, which was just not me at all. But for me, it took until I was like about that age to understand that kind of responsibility actually breeds a little bit of confidence, a little bit of knowing what you're talking about.
As with most success stories, it didn't happen overnight.
So I left BGI, what had become BGI. So I was there through the sale of Wells Fargo Nico to Barclays to form BGI, and then did some work on the ETF platform, and then punched out when Lee Cranefist came in to run the iShares business largely, and a whole team of us went on to do other things. I went on to go run a small fund called Open Fund, which was an actively managed mutual fund, which did brilliantly well in 1999 and tanked like a submarine in 2000.
For reasons undisclosed, or would you like to?
Mean, the markets were pretty. I was an IPO heavy tech investor. So in 99, I think we were up 165%. In 2000, I think we were down 80 something. So we gave it all back.
Yeah.
And then 9/11 happened and we all went bankrupt. So, I took a couple of years off. So when 9/11 happened, I had a 1-year-old daughter and had just folded my business, and we were pretty much destitute. And so we moved back out here to the country where we live now. My wife went to work for the post office and I started consulting, doing anything I could. So, I pretty much didn't have a steady job for about 4 or 5 years there, and just wrote and spent time in the woods and built houses mostly with my hands.
Anxiety level.
Oh, a million %.
Yeah. So and payroll to business school to unemployed to building houses. How did ETF.com get going?
So in that sort of window, so Matt Hogan was my biotech analyst when I was a fund manager. He was terrible. Matt Hogan is now the CIO of Bitwise Asset Management.
I know, yeah.
And he and I worked at ETF.com together for years and years and years as well. But in that window between 9/11 and 2008, when I joined ETF.com, Matt, I want to say, was working for Fleischman Hillard, PR firm. And I did a lot of speech writing for him on sort of a ghostwritten basis. He had clients like up and down government and was doing tons and tons of sort of policy speech writing work. And so I did a lot of policy speech writing work around the corners. I did a lot of ghostwritten technical manuals and finance documents and stuff like that, just stuff around the edges, a lot of science writing. Again, almost all of it not bylined for like the National Institutes of Health and places like that. So I had just sort of scrambled to keep it all together for 5 or 6 years. And then right around in there was when ETF.com was starting to become a thing. Matt Hogan got hired there and then brought me over sort of almost immediately after he started working there. And the rest was sort of history. And then he and I worked there for quite a few years. He was CEO for a while. I was CEO for a while. We traded that back and forth before we sold that thing off into pieces.
And now you're unemployed, but not destitute.
Now I'm not. Yeah. So from there, ETF.com was a great little entrepreneurial business that launched the Inside ETFs conference, which we sold off, and it built a whole data and analytics business, which became FactSet's ETF data analytics business. And I went over to FactSet for a little while, came back to ETF.com for a little while, all basically the same job, just sort of being ETF nerdery pundit, helping people launch products, helping people sell products. That was pretty much all I did. All the way through to Vetify, honestly, because I went from CEO of ETF.com to director of research at ETF Trends and Database, and then that became Vetify. And Vetify just got sold to the Toronto Stock Exchange Group, TMX, and so that sort of created this opportunity for a next chapter. So what that is, I will let you know when I figure it out.
One of the things that really stood out to me about Dave is his ability to so thoughtfully reflect on the journey And I will add that if you know of Tom Morgan too, and his interaction with Tom, Dave is really thoughtful.
So what's the through line for all of this with you?
I know what I would like the through line to be. I'm going to tell you my made up answer.
Okay.
My made up answer is I wish that the answer was curiosity, because certainly the pieces of my career for the last 30 some odd years that have been good have always been when I have been chasing something that I can't get out of my head. Richard Feynman always used to talk about have the questions you can't answer in your head all the time. Write them down on a piece of paper. I've got them in a little book here all the time. And I try to keep that advice with me all the time. I did not do that. I should have chased that curiosity more directly. I think I would have not had the 4 or 5 years of downtime after 9/11.
Why didn't you?
Fear, 100% fear, right? I mean, being what felt like being young parents. We had a second kid in 2004. That was just the most anxiety possible, right? I mean, I made bad choices about, my physical health and how much I drank and what I ate, and thankfully didn't make any stupid decisions about relationships or anything like that. Thank God, my wife loves me as much as she does. But no, it was definitely dark times. And I think if I had been willing to live in the uncomfortableness and live in the fear of like, oh my God, I have 2 kids and I literally don't know how we make mortgage in 3 months. If I'd had a little more guts, I think I would have chased some things that would have been interesting and maybe taken me in totally different directions. I came out of that window deeply curious and deeply hungry to learn things again. And that's really what's driven me the last 15 years.
I love that answer. I think it's both inspiring and also convicting, right? If you find yourself someone to be curious or find yourself someone to be passion driven, and then also someone who finds yourself in unfulfilling jobs or things that feel like dead ends. Did you ever feel like there was is there a wrong turn that you can remember through all of that?
I try not to live my life that way very often. I think there are certainly dark times. There definitely have been plenty of dark times, and you don't get to be 57 years old without having a few dark times in your life. And a lot of those have had to do with family members that we've lost. Certainly 9/11 really did a number on me. I lost a lot of friends and a career, like all in one day. And it made me really question why I was doing any of it. We had already made the decision not to live in Manhattan, which I think, if you're going to be in the financial services industry in 2000, not being in Manhattan was a significant choice. And that sort of limited the set of opportunities that were available. But more than anything, I was just psychologically incapable of focusing on work enough for years, honestly. Thankfully, a little bit of therapy, a little bit of prayer, all works out.
Yeah.
You make that sound so easy.
I'm about to say, it certainly sounds like it works out. And I know most of us have seen, so I'm going to assume that at some point you've seen this chart of life satisfaction and life like happiness and how it kind of basically downtrends until, what is it, late 40s, early 50s, something like that?
Zero transcendence is the phrase, right? You hit your kids are out of the house phase and things definitely change.
I was about to say, do you feel like that tracks with you?
For me, it's definitely tracked. And for most of the folks I know, most of the folks I would consider my closest analogs, meaning socioeconomic backgrounds, white New England Protestant dudes with 2 kids. I have a set of friends that match that profile. And I think it's pretty universal, honestly, in that cohort, at least. I think it's tough for me to tease apart how much of it is my kids are out of the house and relatively okay. They're still in school. My daughter's in grad school, but they're doing great. I'm not worried about my kids the way I was when they were 6. Yeah. That level of anxiety is not quite there. It gets replaced with another kind. And that has for us, just a transformative effect on your whole life, right? When the kids are out of the house and you get all this time with your wife again, and it's a huge, huge shift. And so that's a big part of it. But at the same time, I think there is something that happens biologically and spiritually as you enter into a later stage of life. And I think it's well documented. And I think it's worth exploring and celebrating. And I think people who try to chase it away with sports cars and big trips aren't necessarily getting the point. So for me, I've become much more simple a lot quieter. I spent a lot more time by myself and in the woods than I did, say, in my 40s. So for me, it's been great. I don't know if that's the case for everybody, but for me, it's been great. But I do think it's a thing.
Okay, Mark, let's get into it, shall we?
Cool. Let's roll.
One of the primary concerns when contemplating a sabbatical is whether or not you can afford to take time off work. So financial planning becomes crucial in this decision-making process. What are some important questions and concerns that someone who is considering or is in a sabbatical should be considering?
Well, the first one, it's obvious to me as a professional financial planner and as somebody with an accounting degree, but in the end, it's all about cash flow, right? So what cash flow do you have coming in, which in this case is probably zero? And then therefore, what resources do you have that can pay for this? How much is it going to cost? You have to figure out what it's going to cost to do this and what is the affordability factor.
So in other words, you need a budget.
Yeah, and I'm particular about this because of the behavioral aspect. I prefer to call that a spending plan. And you've got to remember, and I highlighted it a little earlier, you likely have a change in expenses, but you doggone sure have a change in income.
Yeah. And when we're talking about these changes too, I know a lot of people who approach a season of life where they're taking time off as reducing a lot of expenses. Do you really encourage them to reduce life, or do you try to help them figure out how to still live, pay attention to quality of life? Are you considering some of those things as you're talking to folks about their expenses?
One of the things that anybody who decides to talk to me about financial planning, they're going to learn. I never advocate that you reduce life. You only have one. And as somebody who's worked with a fair number of people who end their intentional earning career, I've never seen a person that wants to take a spending haircut the day they walk out of the office.
Yeah.
So then you've got to figure out, what does my income structure look like? Is there any income that's coming in from my investments or maybe a business where I'm a partner or something like that? Or do we have to construct it out of your investment basket?
Yeah. So let's talk about income. Like with income, we don't, obviously, if we're going into a sabbatical, we're probably going into a period of time where we're not receiving like a paycheck. What
Right.
other forms of income do you look at with clients who may come in and start trying to figure out how to plan for a sabbatical?
Well, for somebody who's going to walk away from their primary career, either for a period or forever,
Yeah.
I'm looking at every possible source of income.
Okay.
And now the typical things you have, right, are a basket of investments, some of which may produce capital gains, some of which may produce income. You've got to look at that basket of investments and figure out, what income can I generate for what period of time? And what period of time do we need to generate income? You might have other income generating things, rental properties. Again, you might be an equity in a past partnership. All of your assets, we have to figure out whether they can be productive, no matter what they are.
Mm-hmm. And just peek behind the curtain. I know the answer to this, but I'm going to make you say it because I like to plant this thought, especially in early, like younger workers, is a 401k accessible during a sabbatical? At what cost?
Well, sure it is. Now, how it's accessible and what the consequences of that are. Well, if you want to get really technical, right, you can do a 72T. Now, you have to take at least 5 years of distributions, and the distribution has to be level and fixed every distribution you take. But there are ways to get money out penalty-free from a non-Roth 401k. Now, if you're talking about a Roth account, it's a whole different conversation. Yeah. And from a certain perspective, a 10% penalty on the basis of the distributions is not necessarily the end of the world if what it enables is the life you really want to live. And if you're miserable what you're doing.
Fair statement.
It's just not my story, but I walked away from a 7-figure income when I was 44 years old. I know you hear this and it's a cliche, but the reality is for many people, for most of the people that I think you and I talk to, it ain't about the money. And it's whether you're making $75,000 a year or $7.5 million.
So income, we can look at it from different sources. You could pull it from your retirement accounts. Obviously, with your financial planner, that would be something that you would want to consider and how that impacts your future retirement security. Could someone technically work during a sabbatical? Do people do that?
I don't see why not. I mean, what are you doing, right?
Right.
I mean, my understanding of sabbatical, and I've never been a tenured professor and taken an official one, is, you're choosing to separate from what you've been doing professionally for some relatively long period of time. I mean, you work at some place for 6 months and quit. That's not a sabbatical to me. Now, maybe you want to go do something else and you can get paid for it. I mean, I could see walking away from, and I would argue we have a client who's done this actually, was a pretty senior IT executive in a large publicly held company and walked away for 4 years to go teach math in high school. I don't know that that would be classified as a sabbatical or not, but it was a very, very different way to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
And could this person go back and be an IT executive 100%? I have no doubt. Now they're going to choose to, I don't know. But I think, I do know this. They intended that that's what they were going to do for another 10 or 15 years. They did it 4 years and stopped. I think in the end, it might actually turn out to be a sabbatical, even though that wasn't the intent. But I'm sure you could, and there are probably people who have, said, look, I'm going to walk away from, let's just pick a very challenging profession, right? Family practice attorney.
Yeah.
I'm going to walk away from that for a year, and I'm going to go be a greeter at Walmart 20 hours a week because I like talking to people and greeting people. I would call that a sabbatical. Still earning a living.
Yeah.
That might be a tenth of what you were making as a successful attorney, but
it is a break from the work that you were doing.
It's a break from the work.
Yeah.
A mental break and a physical break.
And physical. What else do you, or have we not talked about, like other things to consider about sabbaticals that are different than careers, like people that are in the middle?
From a planning perspective, I mean, you have to think about things like risk management. I mean, when you work for any decent sized company, you've got life insurance, you've got you may have long-term care insurance, you've got some sort of disability program. Now, they may not be really sufficient for what you need, but you have some base of risk protection.
Yeah.
If you haven't done the work, you're walking away from all that stuff. And if you're traveling, for example, healthcare in non-US companies in countries is not a given. And we've had clients who've done this, who've booked, significant European trips where they're going to be gone for 2 weeks or a month. And any savvy travel agent is going to tell you to get some gap health insurance to at least get you back to the United States if there's something serious that happens. And I know we're in a universe right now where there's a lot of tearing down of what's going on in this particular country. But there are very few people who want to have their healthcare anywhere else. And you can bitch and moan about the price of it and the way that insurance companies work and Medicare and all the rules and how doctors get paid. But if you need something serious done, you want to be in the U.S.
Yeah. So insurance, risk management. And then I would think maybe the last one, I don't know, you may have more than one on your brain, but the big one that comes to mind is even if you're not pulling from retirement plans to cover the gap of your sabbatical, you are still affecting your long-term wealth by choosing to take a period of time where you're cutting your income.
Oh, good gosh, yes. If you're maxing, let's just say you hit the magical IRS age of 50. So you're maxing your 401k plan, plus you're maxing the excess contribution. I think you put those two things together right now, and it's $30,500 a year. And if you're going to work for another 10 years, first of all, you just put in $305,000 worth of principal. And every year you're adding a layer that's compounding it. Pick your investment strategy. On average, over the last, I'm looking at the chart in my wall, it's 100 years of data, compounding each layer, each $30,500 layer, each year, somewhere between probably 6 and 10% net of expenses and fees.
Yep.
By the time you get to between 50 and 60, I haven't done the math on this recently, so I don't know the exact number, but you probably have $1 million worth of additional assets for retirement income. And at 10 years, it might be more if we had some really good investing years. That's, round numbers, that's $35,000 to $60,000 a year in income for 30 to 35 years, depending on how much risk you want to take generating it and what happens in the marketplace. But I don't know about you, but I call that real money.
It is real money. Yeah. Hypothetically, back of the math envelope on 100K, let's just say either you spent it or you didn't save it, compounded over 10 years at 8%, $216,000. We're not talking That's an additional $116,000 of investment returns, compounded investment returns on top of $100,000 that you were able to put in because you were working. So I think the data, if we're looking at the facts, there's not a whole lot of reasons on paper that makes sense financially for someone to take a sabbatical. But at the end of the day, we still do. And we do this because they're meaningful to life and joy and purpose, and they're worth it. And so it does require is some planning. What it does require is some intentionality. What it does require is, in a lot of cases, some help from someone who is able to look at all the details that we've just been discussing. But it doesn't mean that it's not a good decision. The facts may not support the data on paper, but if you talk to anybody who's done sabbaticals, Dave and especially, they'll tell you it's worth it.
20 years of being in this business, and before that, 20 years of designing complex technology solutions would mean that experience to me tells me that very few decisions are made on the facts. It's some combination of what is your expected outcome and what is it that you really want in life. Expected outcome being the math side of it. And sometimes the math is completely ignored. Let's just take a mortgage payoff. If you're one of those very fortunate people who refied at 2.5% or 3%, and you're investing in a 70% equity portfolio, on the math, there is zero reason to ever pay your mortgage off. You want that mortgage to last 100 years if you could, mathematically. And yet we have people every day who are paying their mortgages off. And I would tell you right now, if my wife had control of whether we pay our mortgage off or not, our mortgage would be paid off.
Yeah.
But she has ceded that to me, and I still hear about it every month. But I'm
still
like,
hear about it every
month. Not happening.
Yeah. I appreciate Dave opening up his world and allowing us to see behind the curtain for him. I think this has hopefully been a great discussion for anybody listening in and thinking about sabbaticals or considering whether that could be one for them. I do recommend you reaching out to a financial advisor that you trust to consider your facts around and circumstances around taking a sabbatical. But at the end of the day, just hear from both of us, Mark and I. I'm pretty sure you can chime in too. But this is something that if quality of life demands it, there's no dollar amount that needs to be justified for you. So sit down with your advisor and work out a plan that can give you the quality of life that you're looking for back in that moment to take a breath and find out your purpose and what you were made for and why you're here. A big thanks to our amazing guests who agreed to join us on a journey through their career stories on how did we get here.
If you've enjoyed the laughs, surprises, and unexpected turns, be sure to hit subscribe for more intriguing tales.
Your support means the world to us.
Until the next episode, keep asking, keep exploring, and keep wondering.
How did we get here?
This podcast is not intended as and may not be considered to be investment advice and does not constitute a recommendation of any investment strategy or product for a particular investor. The information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy or sell the investments mentioned. Investors should consult a financial professional before making any investment decisions. The opinions are those of the host and interviewees at the time of the podcast recording and are subject to change. These comments should not be construed as recommendations, but as an illustration of broader themes. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future results. They involve risks, uncertainties, and assumptions. There can be no assurance that actual results will not differ materially from expectations. Investments involve varying degrees of risks, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or strategy will be suitable or profitable for our client's portfolio. All investment strategies can result in profit or loss. Just Boss is an investment advisor representative of Wealth Tech Partners, LLC, DBA, Lake Avenue Financial, which is a registered investment advisor and only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Mark Newfield is an investment advisor representative of Journey Strategic Wealth, which is a registered investment advisor and only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor is not an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators and does not mean the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. The firm is not engaged in the practice of law or accounting. You should always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation.